Well, thank you for the introduction. As Christina said, I'm Lindsay Teepee.
I'm Teresa Mooney.
And I'm Reg Lichty.
And we're going to start things off with Reg talking about national policy.
Great. So, actually, can we flip to the congressman first, and then, if it's up there, maybe it's not.
Oh, it might have gotten added on. It's on the deck.
I want to kick off with Congress, and then we'll work our way down. From there, I should work our way up.
We're missing a slide.
We are excited to have this chance to talk with you about policy. This has been such an, I think, really exciting organic movement nationally, and policymakers have, for the most part, I think, only started to come together and really recognize the potential of open more recently. Of course, there was great leadership in the last administration that we'll talk a little bit about. But we're really starting to see greater recognition, greater normalization of this work among especially members of the education committees on Capitol Hill, but even among other rank and file members. So the three of us, I think, will give you some really good ideas to help further your work and your discussions in 20 or 30 minutes or so. And we're going to do that by just highlighting a few of the developments federally and nationally that we think are notable. It's only going to be a drop in the bucket. I mean, many of you are going to say, I know of this great movement in this part of the country or in this state or in this school district. We tried to pick out a few to just give a sense of direction and also to say, gosh, I can hang my hat on that piece of federal policy to move something I want to do at home. And I apologize, I don't have a slide on this, but let's start with the Congress and just talk about a couple of the baby steps that have been taken in the last few years, beginning with the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is, of course, the successor to No Child Left Behind. Not a huge OER focus here, but I think some important language built into the Title IV Student Support and Academic Enrichment block grant, including some allowable use of those funds to develop and adopt open. And I think the way that that program is crafted, I think you can take that little bit of information, that little bit of statutory language, and really run with it in a big way if you can persuade your peers at the state level or your peers at the district level, where about 95% of those dollars flow, to start some, provide some additional maybe seed money for things you already have going. Now look, Congress has only funded that program at about $400 million, which is unfortunate. It has an authorization level that's 4 times that. There's a very good chance over the next 2 weeks, though, it's going to become a lot larger because it's also a source of support for school safety. So stay on the lookout for that. And there are, Tracy's here from CETA. There are a number of advocates around the room that have been fighting to get that Title IV number up. Use it. We'll hear a little bit about how states have kind of referenced it in their ESSA plans from Teresa in a minute, but know that that's there if you don't already. Second, one of the champions, or actually I should say 2 of the champions of that ESSA language have said, where else can we do this in federal K-12 law? You might know that the House almost unanimously passed a Career and Technical Education Act update last year. Jared Polis of Colorado, who was one of the people that fought for the open language in Title IV, was successful in getting some open language into the House CTE bill. And Orrin Hatch, who was a Senate champion of that language in ESSA, is working with Senator Bennett of Colorado to do similar language on the Senate side. So the Senate hasn't gotten its process going yet, but Hatch and Bennett have introduced a CTE innovation bill that has, among its primary pillars, a focus on open. So there'll be a chance to use CTE formula dollars, too. And I know that they're accounted for 1 million times over, but that $1.2 billion is still another source of support that'll be on the horizon once Congress gets its act together and passes the CTE law.
It's going to happen.
And then, I think there's an ongoing conversation in higher education, of course, around textbooks that we're all familiar with. I'll just briefly say on both the House and Senate side. There are a couple of bills pending that will hopefully become at least part of the debate as Congress continues its work in the Higher Education Act. Again, Mr. Polis, in partnership with Representative Corbello as a Republican co-sponsor, has introduced a bill called the Affordable Textbook Act, which provides some seed money for campus-based open initiatives. Similar bill pending on the Senate side that Senator Durbin has worked on for a couple of Congresses. So we've got a nice K-12 higher ed kind of focus, and then this appropriations work around increasing Title IV to make that something you can use out in the field. Do you guys want to add anything to the congressional piece? Anything I missed?
I think you covered Congress quite well.
Yeah, sorry, I get excited
We don't want to
about it. I
belabor
get
the
excited
point. We
about
don't
it.
want to make you regret coming to DC.
Yeah, and I'll be quick. I'll be more brief now. It's very common for a new administration to come in and update the discretionary grant priorities that are used on an a la carte basis by a secretary to incentivize the types of applications they want to see in the various discretionary grant programs, depending on how you count it, right? This is $3 to $4 billion worth of spending every year across the ed continuum. Just in the last couple of weeks, this secretary has published the department's final priorities that they'll work with for all discretionary grant programs. They've already rolled out a couple of them that you can see. Well, on the next slide, we'll get to it. But I wanted to flag for you that priority 6, and we were very pleased to see this, includes in that STEM priority a reference to open educational resources. There was a little bit of a knee-jerk across the government after the conclusion of the last administration for the new team to say, well, if they did it, we don't like it. I think open has been a really terrific example of something that's so, such a no-brainer that they're continuing the work. And so not only did we see, and we'll talk about this in a minute, that they continued an important new regulation requiring open for all competitive grant outputs for the most part. They continued to feature open among the Secretary's discretionary grant priorities. So if you've completed, a federal grant application at the Department of Education, you'll know they always ask about absolute priorities, competitive priorities, and invitational priorities. These 11 discretionary grant priorities will be selected and positioned as one of those 3 types of priorities in future grant programs. They won't all reference open. They won't all reference priority 6 around STEM. But the opportunity is there for the secretary and the team there to say, it's a really good fit here. And so that's exciting, and I think a positive sign that this work, among other things that are happening at the department, including around the Go Open announcement this week, that I think show momentum, and that's the result of a lot of hard work of people in this room that made that happen.
And I would just add to that, just because she's in the room, a special thanks to Sarah Trenton and her team at the Office of EdTech for helping to keep this a priority.
Good job. Okay, so, and Lindsay and Teresa will add some kind of color to this as well. I referenced this open licensing rule, which was completed right at the end of the last administration. We saw over the course of the prior administration some interesting open rule requirements at Labor, targeted kind of open requirements at the Department of State on some foreign assistance programs. The U.S. Ed, of course, had been, through kind of Hal Plotkin's work and others, really out in front on these issues, including supporting a lot of the early open work at Labor around the trade adjustment assistance grants that were used to develop, I think, at scale, a lot of great open resources. One of the last things that great team did before they left was say, we really need a requirement across all competitive grants that the outputs would be openly licensed. There are a few exceptions. The Ready to Learn television program is accepted. Some, limitations around grants that are jointly put out between agencies, and then I think scholarly publications. But know that there's this general requirement for all competitive grants now that you put some kind of an open license on it. There are parameters in the Code of Federal Regulations and the OMB regs that specify some guardrails for that, including the ability to use a non-commercial if you want to go that way, but there's flexibility there to say, we want this level of open, but I think it's a huge step in the right direction, great thing for kids. And it'll be something people have to adjust to. I'm sure there'll be a lot of surprised folks as they read through these new competitions this year, but really exciting. So.
Yeah. And I would just say, like, as we've talked through this morning about sustainability, I've heard a lot of discussion, at least at my table, come up about state policies and district policies that can really enable open resources to become sustainable. At the federal level, I think you see a huge lever in controlling a lot of money and figuring out like these top level resources. If you imagine this rule had been in place when the discretionary grants were given out through the Obama administration around Race to the Top, the sheer amount of resources that were created through that program, some of which did end up becoming openly licensed because of decisions at the state level, that was not a guarantee. You see efforts across the government to think about these competitive grant programs at the federal level. At New America, we also released a paper called The Case for Open Use Policies that looks at both competitive programs and discretionary grant funding like this. We also look at research funded through the federal government, which is a huge and still slightly untapped lever that this rule doesn't cover. And we look at how other sort of efforts around open data, open government, and other forms of open information are sort of colliding together to create what sort of looks like a hodgepodge of policies. But you guys know from your state and local kind of experiences that it really kind of takes that mess before it starts to get sorted out into a cohesive and coherent policy that kind of covers everything. So the federal government is still figuring that out too, and this rule at the Department of Ed helped in a big way really increase at the federal level the competency of a lot of folks in what open licensing is and what kind of impact it can have for transparency, for efficiency, and for reuse of materials. So definitely keep an eye out for some competitive programs. These two that are listed here in 28 are ones that have been recently announced and are not specific to pre-K-12, but competitions like these are announced kind of on a rolling basis. And, you know, as you see them pop up, they might provide like ample sources of resources for you. So, yeah, I can just jump in here. So I know that Barbara is here, and we're gonna, you know, tout her huge accomplishment. You see what's happening at the federal level kind of come down to the state level through open licensing policies. And Washington's a great example of a state that has kind of pursued how to openly license materials comprehensively. There are other examples that have been accomplished through legislation like Texas, and I'll let Reg jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, these are just highlights. Texas in particular has been interesting over the years in this work, and I think, you know, especially for a state that not only says it's about local control, but is in fact about local control, they've been able to find some, I think, creative ways to move the needle, and I think this particular open kind of requirement that says, you know, basically if the state is going to go out into the marketplace and acquire materials that are going to be used more widely in the state, that there should be this, you know, opportunity to openly license in a way that'll ensure that they're spread across the state, of course, but also in a way that's cost effective and provides all of the instructional benefits that open offers. So I think that one in particular, which is new, is great to see. So. Yeah, and then just related to the, you know, the statutory conversation, we've cast a really wide net to say, you know, what is happening in instructional materials across the country and state legislatures this session. I mean, if you look at the list that way, you know, they're approaching 100 bills pending across the country. Not all of them mention open, but a pretty significant number of them do. I think there's one big trend this year, and this is classic kind of, I think, early stage legislating, a number of those bills would create a task force or a commission or some sort of an expert panel to examine the advantages of open. You know, and then we highlighted one here that I think is interesting, right? This kind of Maryland bill, I see Val in the back laughing, but about the weight of, you know, backpacks. I know that's not yours. We wanted to, just to give you a sense of some of the things that are out there, but, you know, it's hard to miss that this is something that state legislatures recognize now as a pretty powerful tool, and they're hearing it from their districts, and I think they want to do something about it. I think by summer we're going to have some interesting, probably new laws on the books, including hopefully a few of these commissions that the community then can help educate them about where they should go and why. So.
Another interesting point just that came up in our conversation, thinking of Val, is, you know, the other thing about all the variety of legislation that's pending in the states, you never know when an effort that seems completely unrelated will either help or completely derail what you're trying to do. We talked about an effort at our table in Maryland to think about how to limit or in some cases eliminate screen time. And if you're thinking about using your one-to-one initiative and leveraging digital technologies to promote the use of open educational resources, and your legislature comes behind you and says, you can't use laptops for 50% of the day, there are a lot of different ways where your legislature, and not knowing what you're up to, can really conflict. So I think that part of what's been really valuable about Foresight Law and Policy's tracking of legislation and all the kinds of different ways that OER and digital materials legislation can kind of come about, sometimes very rapidly, sometimes with very strange special interest groups pushing behind them, is to try and make the connections about, like, all of this work, the more connected it becomes, the more we try and link professional learning with our digital tools and streamline our learning management systems, the more one little tweak can really throw off, you know, upset the whole apple cart. So I think that, you know, these kinds of pieces can be really important to track and keep an eye on to make sure that all the efforts that you're kind of putting in are well communicated with the legislature, and that they understand how interrelated these things actually are. There you
Yeah.
go.
So something that we've also noticed is that there are several states that have incorporated open educational resources into their ESSA plans in one way or another. You can see Oklahoma's language there on the slide. But I also wanted to speak a little bit to the implications of this from one state that I had a chance to speak with recently. I chatted with someone from the Delaware Center for Education Technology who just shared that having OER within their ESSA plan really helped them maintain the urgency of this work. So when thinking about sustainability and thinking about how there are always disruptive factors that could derail these movements, you know, staff turnover, things like that, actually codifying this work into law has helped make sure that this actually stayed on the Delaware agenda.
Do you want to kick that?
So Lindsay and I also wanted to take this platform to share a little bit about the work that we've been collaborating on. So CCSSO and New America are working on a policy paper to really discuss and highlight different OER pathways that states are taking. We recognize that there wasn't a lot of research out there on what states are really doing. And we also recognize that states are, you know, they're deep in this work. And we wanted to make sure to highlight some of those bright spots and make sure that it was in a document that could be shared to really help others that are in this space right now. So I should also shout out some states that we talked to. So thank you, Michelle, Alan, Val, and Barbara is not in the room, but we've been able to chat with those folks in the room to really help this come together. So we just wanted to highlight a few of the actions that we've seen from states to really advance OER within their states. So there are 4 trends that we've really identified that we're gonna work to build out a little bit within this paper. One of them is seeing that OER is something that's being included in state content reviews. So obviously instructional materials are really important these days. High quality instructional materials really matter. And so states are really thinking about strategies and systems to make sure that the vetting process for OER aligns with the vetting process that any other content would go through as well. We're also seeing that in some states, rather than taking already made content, they're creating their own and making sure that those are really tailored to the standards within their states. And we're seeing states take really different, kind of different pathways to this. So some states are using teachers to really do this work. Others have really strong partnerships with universities to kind of create this content. And so that diversity is something that we're going to make sure to talk about within this paper. We've also seen how OER pops up within professional learning. Some states, I think we've already mentioned this a couple times today, are hosting regional summits to make sure that districts are coming together to really talk about OER in practice within their states. We've also had a chance to talk to a couple states that have shared how OER just creates an exciting opportunity for professional learning that's more linked to curriculum than otherwise it might be. So states are seeing that OER has the potential to align curriculum, instruction, and professional learning rather than having them be kind of segmented things. And lastly, of course, with all of these materials, you need a place to put them. And so we've been talking with states about what their state portals and repositories look like. And as with everything else, we see diversity there, but states are really thinking about what features and functionality are important to them in choosing which repositories they use, and some states are even working to develop them on their own to really tailor it to their context.
I think that the second part of our research gets at some of the conversations where we've started here today, and sustainability being a big piece of that. What are the strategies that states are doing to accomplish this work? And I think that sometimes we kind of group all of these things together, and it's just sort of a mishmash of states are doing it all, and they are, but some of them are the specific, we identified as specific work that's being done, and some of them are these sustainability strategies. Funding and policy, we've been talking about all day in different ways, and those are sustainability strategies. You need funding in order to make this kind of stick, and we've heard how in different ways at the state, district, and federal level, we're kind of accomplishing that through either, freeing up money by not buying textbooks, through getting additional state appropriations. That funding piece has felt really critical in all of the states that we've talked to, though everybody's going about it in a very different way, and some have shoestring budgets and are really kind of pinching pennies to make it work, and others have legislatures that are tossing, $10 million out here and there, and don't we all wish we lived there? Man, Texas is hot. Just kidding. I went to Arizona State, so I really can't complain about the heat. The other two pieces that are sometimes soft skills and difficult to talk about are these communications and collaborations pieces. I feel like the collaboration piece doesn't really need to look too much further than this room to see how that collaboration sustains the movement, sustains the work. The collaborations that Go Open has facilitated from the department down, the department's work collaborating with states through CCSSO, the work that they've done collaborating with districts that has been led by a lot of districts in many cases to continue the Twitter engagement, the Facebook engagement, Facebook groups. Those collaborations are critical. Barbara, when she spoke with us, highlighted in Washington just the level of work that they've done with the education service agencies. She has talked to many of the other states in the room. They collaborate with their districts on the ground and their higher ed system. And everyone has examples of those collaborations that keep the movement going forward. I think the one piece that's come out is the communication is so important, and it's often the place where this can fall down, when communication isn't happening to the legislature and they don't understand what's going on, so they're legislating in a different way. When there are these real challenges with trying to get out to districts what the state is doing, and when teachers are having trouble communicating what they're doing to their principals. There are a lot of really bright spots that we're very excited to highlight. We know that it is a challenge, so we want to help provide concrete strategies for communication that can be really helpful. And we also wanted to share this with you when it's still kind of messy, because sometimes we know from our own experiences when OER looks really polished and it's totally put together, you really don't provide a lot of feedback and input, and teachers present their beautiful lesson plans, and it's difficult to say, maybe you could do it a little bit different. But as with all the kinds of materials that we're putting in front of you, we want your feedback. This is your work. We want to highlight the best examples and tackle the toughest challenges with you. So right now we have bullet points. We are writing now. We welcome feedback and input. We've interviewed 11 states. If you think we didn't talk to yours, and we should, please let us know. From the district level, if there are key things that you wish your state knew, let us know. And I know that Christina mentioned that we're going to send out all of our contact information, but I would also just add all of our contact information is up here. Tweet us, email us, just stop us before we leave today, and we would love to hear from you and engage with you further. So thank you for letting us talk at your tables, and we have like 3 more minutes if anybody has a question. Yes.
So in the past couple weeks, I've been reading about some changes afoot with E-rate, and I think that we can't ignore the crucial role that connectivity plays at the building level here. So
Yeah.
do you guys have any thoughts on what's happening and how that might affect what?
You wanna take that one?
I'm happy to chime in with some of the work our Open Technology Institute is doing, but I'll let Reg.
Yeah, so it's been, I think now, probably 12 or 13 months since the chairman of the FCC has been talking a lot about E-rate. We don't expect any major regulatory changes, I think, immediately. I would say he has an interest in trying to think differently about how the funding makes its way into the most sparsely populated parts of the country, and has advocated in some quarters for a formula to do that rather than a competitive, or not, a competitive system, but an application system. I don't know that there's a lot of appetite for that on the Hill. It's certainly something that all of the ed tech groups are watching really closely. But I think the good news is that there's nothing on the immediate horizon that should make us anxious, but we should also not expect that there'll be sort of vastly new additional resources. Last thing I'll say about it, there have been some other kind of connectivity initiatives on the congressional and kind of White House, discussion points of the last few weeks around the president's infrastructure plan, which includes some rural broadband investment. The Democrats put out a plan this week that would, of course, invest significantly more. I'm not sure that any of that's going to make its way through the process this year, but it's a great question, and I think we all need to be vigilant but not worried right now.
I would just add, I know Lisa Guernsey had a chance to mention our Open Technology Institute here at New America. Our education policy program, especially through our Learning Technologies project, does a lot of work with them. And they have been, starting with some of the first changes that the new leadership at the FCC has made, they've been a party to the lawsuit around net neutrality. They helped kind of accomplish those regulations and are now a party to the lawsuit fighting against the changes in regulations. And that is something that we have actively participated in, because net neutrality is central to a lot of the work that we are doing in the education space, and ensuring that there aren't prioritization of different kinds of content, and that open content, especially when we're thinking about locally grown content, is just as accessible as all of the other content that is being pushed out from people who perhaps could pay to play at a different level and make their content faster. Is really central to what makes the internet a vibrant marketplace for all ideas. With that, we are also actively monitoring what is a little bit more of a priority, or seems to be at the FCC, which is the Lifeline program. We have been very concerned about some backward steps in terms of Lifeline being used to help bridge the homework gap. And I know that Commissioner Rosenworcel, speaking at the E-rate 20th anniversary in January that happened on the Hill, expressed some real concern about the direction that the Lifeline program is headed. And I guess fortunately and unfortunately, that seems like it has been made a priority before E-rate. But one of the kind of things that we have been tracking is that the evidence that was produced by Commissioner Wheeler right before he left, showing the real benefits of E-rate reform and the effects that it's been having on connectivity, was removed from the Commission's website last January. And we have not seen strong support from the new leadership of the Commission for how E-rate reform has been implemented. And so I think that, again, to echo Reg's point, there isn't cause for alarm at this moment, but I think being watchful and understanding that schools are a part of this conversation, districts and states are really active in understanding how E-rate has bridged the gap for so many schools and students and is critical for rural schools and reaching the rest of our students in schools that aren't online. So when there are comment periods, I know Foresight Law and Policy and other groups in this space, including CETA and others, have been really active about getting the community to involve, to comment, to intervene, to come for advocacy days and go to the Hill, talk to legislators. And I think, you know, it is hard when this is one of a million issues, but again, to that point, like, as we integrate learning, technology, teacher professional development in all our efforts, keeping an eye on these pieces and understanding how they could derail all of our work is so important.
I
Okay,
think the
I'll shut
lifeline
up.
point's really good. I'm just going to say, later this month, the Institute for Education Sciences at USED will publish, hopefully, a report that was required by ESSA, requiring sort of an examination of digital learning outside of the classroom, including this homework gap issue that the lifeline changes were meant to address. So just know that that'll be coming soon, and some of you may have been interviewed for that. So.
Wonderful. We're done.